Hi everyone, this is Mr. Frykowski, and today we're going to be focusing on the importance of FRQs and some important strategies that you should employ when taking the AP Gov exam. Let's begin. So keep in mind that, as we've discussed in class, that an FRQ is not really an essay. It's much different than what you might encounter in an AP US history course or an AP Euro course. It really stands for, or what it does stand for, is a free response question. And again, you're not looking to write an intro, you're not looking to write a conclusion, you're just simply trying to respond to the question, to the prompt. Keep in mind that you do not ever want to use I feel or I think. They're not looking for you to provide your opinion or feelings about something. Instead, they're looking for you to provide facts and make sure that you're well-rounded and knowledgeable about U.S. politics and government. So the big thing is to address the question. That's extremely important. Take some time to understand what the prompt is and what the situation is and what you're supposed to write about. That's a really important strategy. It may sound very obvious, but a lot of students just rush right in. Take a moment, be able to digest what they are asking you. And again, you might even choose to pre-write, meaning you might just write down a list of things that you want to hit on within your FRQ. When providing evidence for your FRQ, it's important to pick the clearest pieces of evidence. You don't want to pick something that's very obscure. You want to make sure that you pick the obvious answers. Really, the big thing is you want to assume that your reader knows absolutely nothing about government. You want to define your terms. You want to explain your concepts that you're writing, flesh out ideas. Almost imagine like it's your kid brother, or you're explaining it to some 10-year-old. Really, whatever the concept is, that's how you want to approach these FRQs. So some basic guidelines: keep the sentences simple and pointed. Of course, you want to incorporate as much government terminology and vocab. That's why it's extremely important to understand it. You want to write clearly, especially neatly. If they can't read what you're writing, automatically you will get a 0. Using transition words to link ideas from previous sentences together. Very important. As I've stated as well, outlining beforehand, sticking to the outline is crucial too. And we're going to talk about sort of being able to pick out how many points an essay is worth, but simply if it asks you to discuss 2 reserved powers given to states, for each power it should get its own paragraph. Make sure you clearly differentiate each power that you're talking about, and you want to maybe put a space in between each one. And when I talk about a paragraph, it doesn't necessarily have to be like 5 to 8 sentences. It could be at least 3. But you want to clearly differentiate each answer. Typically, short essays will not do well, but again, make sure you address the question. The more examples, the better. So your real strategy should be to attack the question. You want to make sure you know what you're writing about. Understand the verb, whether it means to explain, whether it's asking you to analyze or list or identify. Do exactly what the question asks. And what I'm really going to stress in our class is overkill it. If, for example, it says discuss 2 factors of political socialization, don't give them 2, give them 3 or 4. Overkill, because on the AP Gov exam, you can only get points for what you get right. It's like you're earning points along the way. Provide as much as you can. That is the best strategy. Go as far as you can. So this is sort of like extra insurance in the event that something, one of your examples is technically incorrect. Well, you provided several, so this is going to help you. You want to typically take a neutral ideology. You don't want to take a stance on something. You don't want to be, say something derogatory about liberals or something derogatory about conservatives. Be as neutral as you can, because think about this, you want to write it from a neutral political scientist's viewpoint. As I mentioned earlier, avoid the I feel, I think. This is not about what you think on politics. It's making sure that you actually understand politics, that you understand the way that U.S. government operates. You're trying to state as many facts and concepts and explaining how things work. That is the best thing to do. So don't even start with the I think or I feel. Focus on what it's asking you to do. So as I've stated, that each point that you basically dissect in the question should have its own paragraph. So if there's 6 parts to the question, there should be 6 paragraphs. This will help you organize your thoughts and will also make it easier for the grader to grade. Point grub. Be sure that you're able to identify the points and where they go to get them. So if it says discuss and give an example of 2 reserve powers, how many parts would there be? Well, it's asking you first to identify 2 points and then explain the 2 points. So that's 4 points. So what you would have is a total of 4 paragraphs. So make sure you're identifying exactly what it's asking you to do. Be as specific as possible. In addition, you want to be positive. You don't want to be negative. Don't say stuff about political officials or rip into the American public. You want to be as positive as possible, because typically that won't, if you're being negative or cynical, that's not going to provide you with, really any points. You're not really doing much to help you. In addition, you want to agree with the AP test. Do not argue with the premise. Really, if it gives you a prompt, agree with the prompt, accept it, just go with it, even if it kills you to do so. Typically, the prompt's not even going to be controversial anyways, so I would just simply agree with what they say and go along with it. Just provide more facts and stuff like that. As I've said, you want to basically overkill. That should be your strategy. Strategy number 1 is overkill, adding extra. You will have 100 minutes to answer 4 essays, and you'll have 25 minutes per essay. You're going to have a ton of time. Use the time to overkill. So again, if it asks you for 2 examples, you provide 3 or 4. If it says you only have to choose 2 of the 3 items, do all 3 and then overkill them. It's the best thing for you to do. You have plenty of time. You'll be okay. Although you don't necessarily have to be correct in your spelling or grammar, it also helps. Again, you want to make it as easy for the reader as possible. One strategy that some AP Gov teachers force their students to do is the rule of 3, meaning that for each point you have to write 3 sentences. This will force you to definitely address the question. I think it's a very good idea. Try to force yourself, even if you feel repetitive. Just do your best to put at least 3 sentences. Sometimes you might need to be put even more. So talk the talk. Part of doing well in a discipline is acquiring the language, that discipline and talking of that discipline and talking talk. Really, you have to be familiar with the terminology. If you're not familiar with the terminology, you're not going to be able to, go through it and just putting flowery language in it. It's not going to be enough. As I've also stated before, pretend that you're talking to your kid brother. Try to explain and describe something as best as you can so they will understand it. I would even suggest putting examples for everything, even if it's just a list or identify question. Put as many examples as you can. It may also ask you to put other viewpoints, so if you have to acknowledge them, be sure to acknowledge them. Even if you don't agree with them, just acknowledge them, give them some legitimacy, and if need be, provide some examples. Mind what you learned so you can save it. So if you read an article in one of our supplemental readings, bring it up. If it's something we've watched in class, bring it up. So that's important. You want to use the resources that I provide you in class for your exam. So again, you want to overkill. You want to have a neutral ideology. Avoid the I feel, I think statements. Break down the paragraphs by part in points. Identify where the points are. Get them. Answer the question. Be positive. Right? And here's the scoring breakdown as we've talked about in class. So understanding the verbs, it's important to know what each verb means. So if you're asked to list or identify, that means you just have to literally make a list. I would still make you write 3 sentences on it, even if it's just a list. Typically, a list or identify is the easiest part of an FRQ, and this is sort of where the rote memorization comes in. But again, you do need to know your stuff. I mean, if you don't, you're going to miss these easy points. In terms of define, a definition requires a student to provide a meaning for a word or concept, so you're definitely just going to define it. Give the definition. Provide an example as well. It can't hurt you. That is important to do. In terms of describing, a description involves providing a depiction or a portrayal of a phenomenon or its most significant characteristics. They most often address the what. So if it's asking you about political cleavages in Mexico, well then make sure that you've identified both sides of the cleavage. So again, you're describing it, providing details, and as many examples if needed on that subject area. Discuss generally requires that students explore relationships between different concepts. So you may need to identify the various concepts, then describe those concepts you just identified, and then explain them. Again, some of these verbs have multiple parts to them. When we're talking about explanations, you will need to look at the possible causes of a relationship. You might need to first identify and then discuss the logical connections or even patterns. So again, you'll notice that there are a lot of steps involved with these verbs. Compare, contrast. You cannot simply have a one-paragraph description. If it asks you how do women participate in Iranian politics, in a one-paragraph description of how they participate in Nigeria with no connections between the two paragraphs. You need to link things together. Be as specific as possible. You need to compare, contrast. They cannot be independent of each other. Compare, contrast. How are they different? Be as specific, overkill it. In addition, when it comes to evaluating and assessing something, well, that's basically judging something based on a set criteria. You may need to know this criteria. So for example, you may say, or the question might ask you, to what extent is the Welfare Reform Act of 1996 an example of devolution? And you would say, well, devolution is this, and the Welfare Reform Act is this, and yes, it does meet this criteria because this act gave more power to the states, and this thus would be an example of devolution. So again, you sometimes might need to make a connection, you might need to know the criteria. There are various parts to this. And analyzing, of course, requires separating a phenomenon into its components, parts, or characteristics as a way of understanding the whole. An analysis should yield explicit conclusions that are explained or supported by specific evidence and or well-reasoned arguments. Some overlap with respect to explaining, but again, you may need to make an argument, may need to look at specific evidence to have a complete analysis. So again, just some review: attack, overkill, neutral, ideology, know, I feel, paragraph points, point grub, positive, agree with the AP tests, adding extra, rule of three sentences per point, talk the talk, kid brother, other viewpoints, and mind what you have learned. The best way to do this is to really know your vocab, because if you're good with your vocab, you'll be well prepared for your AP FRQ. Remember these strategies, employ them. It is the best pathway to a 5. Of course, if you have questions, feel free to ask me in class. All right, thank you.